4 scoops in each one. All right, there might be a tad left next time. Okay. I'm gonna take this little bit of rye bread and put it down here. If you want, we can, you want my bread in the refrigerator?
I don't know what's going on.
You go back outside into the freezer, right?
Correct. Now they can, yeah.
Oh, wow.
Okay. Hello.
I didn't press the button. Hello, everybody.
Hi there.
It's on.
Hello.
I was saying, we're all figuring out how we're gonna spend our money. The lotto money, the Powerball money. Everyone's spending. Says Mike Schwartz wants to buy Vin Scully's house, Mike and Mary. It was actually Mary. Mary wanted to buy it. Mary wants to buy Vin Scully's house in Hidden Hills. But everyone's spending their money already. They're already spending their lottery. I forgot to get a ticket, I have to say. I'm an idiot. Why did I not buy it? Well, when it goes over $1 billion, I always say, now it's worth it. Gotta try when it's $1 billion, right? Yeah,
Exactly.
it's funny though, the odds are you could have actually bought 290 million tickets and you would have won money. Assuming you don't split it with somebody, you actually can make money. The problem is you can't get 290 million tickets printed fast enough.
7-Eleven. I want
90 million tickets. It's not 290 million because I forget somebody said how long it would take to how long it would take to actually print out that many tickets. No, somebody computed it and it was some ridiculous amount of time. No, I know, but if you have 290 million, but you could create a
90 million. In dollars.
no, it's $200 tickets.
Okay, so it's 5.
Yeah, whatever. It's not
It's not billion.
so yeah. Anyways,
$2.
you're right. It's 500, you're right. You're losing money. So that's assuming that nobody splits it with you, in which case you really paid it. Yeah. So good evening, everybody. And I think we're on Facebook already. We're on Facebook too, folks. So if you went on Facebook right now, you would see us. And oh wait, what happened? Oh no, my wife tried to buy a ticket and she was 1 minute too late, so she didn't get it. She says hopefully no one will win it again. Anyways,
What is it?
The lottery is over $1 billion.
she was too late. Well, hopefully someone will win it and remember Temple Beth and me and their winnings, and not just buy Vin Scully's house. Anyways, so wow, a lot of stuff has happened in the last day. A lot of people heard there was an election in Israel over the last 24 hours. Bibi won by a lot this time. It was a pretty definitive win for not just him, but for the right wing and Israel. Some people woke up to find that if you could get, things could go even further, and they did. So we'll see what happens. I mean, we'll see what happens with the negotiation. Obviously, US is some people in the US, I should say, or the US government's not real happy with it. But look, it's not really going to change anything. It's not like the Palestinians were coming back to the peace table with the other government. And again, I think it's a lesson at the very even if you're not a fan of Bibi, the reality is that it sends a message that if you don't negotiate with the people that you think it'll be easier to negotiate with, you could wind up with somebody that's going to be harder to negotiate with. So it's a good lesson. I mean, it's a good lesson for people that the Palestinians have always kind of acted like time was on their side, and it's not. So,
Similar to a term limit.
yeah, no, he can keep being reelected, but as you saw, he can also lose. No, but he could lose 2 weeks from now, or three, well, not 2 weeks, but
Not really understanding Parliament as well as this government. There's definitely some advantages to that.
what do you mean? In which way? Well, it's more democratic, but
We're democratic, but Netanyahu could get kicked out, like you said, in 2 weeks.
yeah. So if the party isn't happy with them,
Right.
then they could be kicked out.
Yeah.
Which happened in England last week. So yes, it's very possible to happen. No, it's not a bad thing, but it can cause chaos, but it can cause chaos. But on the other hand, yeah, but you're right. There's also accountability. And that is always a good thing in government. Nobody could say that accountability is a bad thing to have. And again, it kind of forces people to, look, in our experience in history, a parliamentary government, if it's, if the country itself has a democratic tradition, or let's say a commitment to democracy, right? If it's not a country that's playing around with it, right? Because Iran has a parliament, Russia has a parliament, China has a parliament. No, they all have parliaments, right?
Okay.
So if you don't have a democratic tradition, it don't work. But if you have a commitment to democracy, then what it does is it causes people to work together, and it causes people to actually achieve goals, which what we've seen, at least in the case of, let's say, Britain during World War II, had a very unified government behind Winston Churchill. And so people came together from different parties, and they were able to get through the war, even though they had a parliament. So it doesn't mean that, again, you have chaos, but could have chaos.
Whereas, the next 2 years, nothing's going to get.
Correct. So there is a sense of not having to wait for 2 years and waste time. Yeah.
Oh, there's the benefit. Silver lining.
What?
Stock market's going to do great.
We don't know that. We hope.
Understand it's gridlock.
Every time we think the stock market is going to work in some direction, works the opposite. So we'll see. I hope that it, like everybody should hope that it does well. Yeah. Yeah.
Where's your cousin? It's going to do well.
The stock market will do well. Okay.
What he said, and I believe every.
Okay, listen, I'm an optimist, so I'm not gonna say no. So,
Yes, there's money doesn't know it's one day.
what?
There's a reason.
Why do you think? Well, look, in a lot of countries, people are they're making a change in whatever the opposite direction is, because they're not happy with the global situation. So Brazil did it yesterday. They went back left
Yeah.
because people when they're not happy, change direction. So that's the,
I think.
Wow.
people left for different reasons. Sorry, I'm not gonna say that.
well, wait a second. The bottom line is that what you see, and however many millions of people ended up voting in Brazil, people will vote the opposite way. I mean, that's what midterms are all about, folks. It's not a secret. It was expected. So we'll see. We will pick up where we were, which is not on politics, but on the priests and on what they wear. And what we were reading about was we're done with the description of the building of it. We're not done with the building of it. That comes at the end of Exodus. But what we are done with is we're now moving into the other things that go into the Mishkan. So we talked about the big thing, right? The building, if you will, and now we're getting into what the priests wear. So that's what we're doing in today. So we're starting here in chapter 29, 28, and going into 29, and then we're going to go into 30, and right up into the 10 Commandments, coming down off the golden calf, coming off Mount Sinai. We'll get right up to that. What?
The 15.
The 15 commandments. Yeah, we're going to get right to that. What we finished with last time was the Urim and Tumim, as I showed you the A to Z things that again we showed you were we don't really know what they look like. We do know that they're, as we said, they're on the crest of Yale University as a symbol of light, as it said right here. The meaning of these two words is uncertain. They designate a kind of oracle. So that is the best that we can say about him, and that's why we don't translate him.
Is this the magical stuff on the vestment?
Well, it seems as though, again, these were somehow carried as well. Inside the breastplate of decision, you shall place them. So they were inside there, but then they were taken out when they were being used.
There was something, I'm getting something. mixed
What?
up. There was some, that's magical, that it did something.
I mean, it did something.
What, stones or something?
Well, the stones, again, maybe lit up. We don't, well, no, we got to that too. Those were the stones in the breastplate, right? This is the breast piece. We talked about those ones which had the different tribes. Well, I mean, it could be. I mean, with the things we talked about before, the fact that, again, maybe these things,
Maybe we're talking about it in.
they lit up and, okay. So it doesn't say that in the Torah. They were used and they were part of the priestly vestments. It doesn't say how they were used. That I know, and it's all crystals too. But I will tell you, we don't know exactly what, how they were, but the Torah doesn't say. And so this is where we were. So so it goes back to the ephod, which is another thing that we said is not, that isn't translated because we don't exactly know what it looked like. And we don't know if there's an equivalent to it, right? So we don't use an English word for it because we don't know exactly we don't know how to call it, what to call it in English. So we just transliterate it. We just use the word ephod. So in Hebrew, it's ephod, and that's what we call it. But it says it also has some type of apron type look to it. Again, just to show you real quick, the priestly vestments, because we're in the middle of it, and we're going to be reading about all of these things. Let me just show the one of the pictures that we've used in the past for this is this is the one that we've used a lot because it's kind of colorful and the stuff was colorful. So this is the priest. We talked about the breastplate. This is the incense was in there. The ephod is this thing here, this thing. Well, this either the blue thing underneath, you're right, is either the ephod underneath, or it's this apron that the breastplate is on top of. We're going to read about the turban in a second, and this is the connecting jewels that we said one of them has 6 of the tribes on it, and one of them has the other 6, and then the tribes are also on the stones. So these are all things that are there. We don't see the Urim and Tumim because they didn't even yeah, and we don't really know what they look like, and most people don't even want to talk about them. This is the pomegranates bells that are on the bottom of the tunic. What else? Yeah, these are all the different things that we're going to be reading about the rest of the stuff today with the priestly vestments. So, look, a lot of the things that we saw there just now look a little different. A lot of the priestly vestments that you would see on a priest were based on that. I know you're going to say to yourself, how is that possible? Because when you see, a priest, let's say a Catholic priest, or, well, that's probably not, let me show you.
So specific.
Oh, yeah. And the problem is that the specificity of it is is difficult for us to know because we're not, oh, look at that. We're not actually, so that here's the priestly vestments today, which usually include, some kind of, overcloak and then an undercloak too, a tunic. But obviously they're very different. And I will show you that when we talk about, what this looks like, it's definitely more Middle Eastern style. But you'll see too that on some of the priestly vestments do include for a priest, for Catholic priests do include in some cases a head covering too. We don't even try. Like we don't even try to do those kind of things, mainly because we're not supposed to try to do stuff that we can't do, right? So rather than screw up and do something wrong, we don't do it. And there was a tradition where rabbis used to wear black robes, when they led services back in the day, probably, back in Detroit when you were growing up with Rabbi, some of the people in, in the 50s and 60s, they were still wearing robes pretty frequently, but they wore those robes because Protestant clergy wore similar robes. It had nothing to do with priestly robes, and it had nothing to do with the Kohanim. It had to do with Protestants. They didn't wear it there. They didn't wear the robes. Yeah, it was a little bit more of I think you'd probably would have seen it more in the larger Reform congregations.
Conservative.
Yes.
We're a very large conservative congregation.
Yeah.
Well, is Rimazione, was that always before?
Ramazzion was conservative.
I thought, and he had it, Rabbi Mike.
Yeah, no, I mean, it depended, rabbis wore the black robes or white robes during, and we still wear some kind of robe for high holidays. But this I would tell you is kind of like what, you would have seen at some, probably even more to maybe in Eastern Europe. It was actually still common for rabbis to kind of almost look like clergy, like Protestant clergy. Like here's one, here's like kind of the robe and hat that they wore. But I don't know if that's a yarmulke. Honestly, I think it's more of one of those kind of clerical hats. But anyways,
When you were finishing rabbinical school, did they tell you?
Wear a robe? No. I mean, I made a decision long before that I wasn't going to wear. I didn't want to wear clothes that were distracting, and so I decided a long time ago, more black and white, and that's it. No, seriously. And I said, I'm never going to have anybody go, hey, that's a great tie, or why are you wearing that tie, or whatever.
Well, you said a couple of years ago that you didn't want to stand out from the other people.
Well, that's why I don't wear a robe at services, but very few rabbis today wear robes. But back then it was really to distinguish them as clergy, which again, a lot of my Protestant friends today, they don't wear robes. They do services in normal clothes, very casual, actually. Some people say too casual.
But you wear rabbinical clothes, I don't know what else to call it, during.
High holidays.
And
Yeah.
Yeah, but
and bar mitzvah.
I would just wear a suit. I don't wear a robe. Wear a suit. Just wear a suit. But I don't wear a robe for I only wear the kittel for Yom Kippur, and Rosh Hashanah, but anyone can wear a kittel. That's not a rabbinical thing, actually. That's not a rabbinical robe. That's not a rabbinical robe. I mean, most people don't do it, but the concept of wearing a kittel. If you go to Orthodox, if you go to less even at Chabad, you'll see less people at Chabad wearing it. But if you go to an Orthodox synagogue in Fairfax or Valley Village, a lot of people wearing kittels. Almost everybody's wearing a kittel. So there's nothing different. Like the rabbi wouldn't stand out wearing a kittel. So I mean, that I wear it because the tradition was to wear a kittel, not for the rabbi to wear a kittel, but for anybody to. Anyways, so here's what the priests wore. The priests wore an ephod. The robe of the ephod we saw is pure blue. The opening for the head shall be in the middle of it. Well, that makes sense. You put the opening where's it going to be? But I guess it's basically saying it's even on both sides. The opening shall have a binding of woven work around it. It shall be like the opening of a coat of mail. Interesting, right? Like almost like battle gear, which is the word that they used for this so that it does not tear. On its hem, make pomegranates of blue, purple, and crimson yarns all around the hem, with bells of gold between them all around. So that was the bottom. I showed you was the pomegranate and bells on the bottom. A golden bell and a pomegranate, a golden bell and a pomegranate all around the hem of the robe, which is why we sometimes again put pomegranates on the top of the Torahs to remind us of those pomegranates and bells. The pomegranates usually have bells coming off of them, or sometimes the pomegranate has a bell inside. So we kind of recreate those. And I showed you on the Torah, we have those today on the one Torah crowns that we have. And sometimes there'll just be one, kind of pomegranate style crown that goes over the top. So that went around the hem of the robe. Aaron shall wear it while officiating, so that the sound of it is heard when he comes into the sanctuary before Adonai, and when he goes out, that he may not die. Now, that he may not die seems to be not that the bells are going to protect him from dying, but that he has to do that, otherwise he's going to die.
But there's something else later on, I think, that they have to tie a ribbon around his.
Well, that's not in the Torah, but that's in the Talmud. No, it's not in the Torah, but in the Talmud, it talks about how the high priest, when he went into the Holy of Holies, they would tie a string to him in case he died, because nobody else could go in except for the high priest. Well, it's an explanation for why they did it. They did that. By the way, it was funny because my friend who's a Protestant clergy person told me that he told that story to his church about how serious it is, when you enter the presence of God, that people took it so serious that if somebody died in that moment, that they would be able to retrieve the body. But that goes to maybe a similar idea here, which is that the alert that the high priest, that they're in the presence of the high priest, requires that the high priest essentially announces his presence, maybe to God, but also, well, it's kind of a weird idea that God needs to know that the high priest is there, but that the people need to know that they're in the presence of the high priest. But literally, that this is a life or death situation. So the sound, there was a sound to the priesthood. As we're going to see, there's also a smell to the priesthood. It says, you shall make a frontlet of pure gold and engrave on it the seal inscription, holy to Adonai, kadosh l'Adonai, and suspend it on a cord of blue so that it may remain on the headdress. It shall remain on the front of the headdress. It shall be on Aaron's forehead, that Aaron may take away any sin arising from the holy things that the Israelites consecrate, from any of their sacred donations. It shall be on his forehead at all times, to win acceptance for them before Adonai. So this is the turban. This is the headwear that he has, which again, people say, is this a kippah? Is this a kippah? Well, no, because this is actually, as you saw in the picture, this is actually a full-on turban, right? You saw the picture. This is literally a thing that goes over his entire head, more like a chef's hat. And it also has, and I'll show you, the plate that goes in the front. It says Kodesh Ladonai. So let's just show a quick picture of what that looks like. And let me put it right up there. So you'll see different pictures of it, but the key part of it, of what happens on it, is that we don't see anything. I know, I'm putting it up right now. There you go. So the turban goes over the whole head, and then the gold plate above it, or again, and it's written in the biblical Hebrew, which is why I can't read it. Kadosh Ladonai is the words holy to God. So the priest would wear this on his head, and right out in front, people would know what it is that is going on here, which is that, if you will, the only words that they can say is, it says holy to God. It's almost like he wears that label, right? That's the label on the priest. It's really the only words you can see. Now, it does say that the stones had the names of the tribes on them, but and actually, as we said, there's actually the names of the tribes on these stones too, 6 on each of these stones. But you can see that this was a pretty serious thing, that the gold right there read the message, which was, we mean business here. So, and again, to take away sin arising from the holy things that the Israelites consecrate, which, by the way, seems to imply that they're going to be making mistakes while they do this, because it says to take away any sin arising from the holy things that the Israelites consecrate, which seems to mean that, again, as they do these, they're making mistakes. You shall make the fringed tunic of fine linen, which is the undergarment, right? That's underneath the priestly vestments is the tunic. You shall make the headdress of fine linen. You shall make the sash of embroidered work. And for Aaron's sons, you shall also make tunics. So even though they're not wearing the other stuff on the outside, they're also wearing the tunics that are like Aaron's tunics. Make sashes for them and make turbans for them for dignity and adornment. So also some type of sash, doesn't really describe it completely, but the turban as well, which, as you can see, the turban is made out of linen. So this is high quality stuff. I mean, this is higher level of clothing than most people would wear, and requires a lot of care, and linen wrinkles and tears real easy. And so this is considered high. This is undergarment, but even the undergarment is very expensive. And again, this is lechavod ultifaret. It's for honor, glory, or dignity, and adornment, for it to be beautiful. Both things. It's important for the stuff that we wear, not only to carry dignity and a level of respect, which is what kavod means, but tifaret means beauty. That's what's translated as adornment. So it has to also be aesthetically pleasing. So those two things kind of go into what the priests wear.
Do you know how long this lasted, the priests wearing,
This stuff?
this until we got to the Holy Land?
No, for all the way through until for
Sages?
1,200 years. This is what people wore. With the exception of when the temple was destroyed for 70 years, and for 1,200, 1,300 years, this is what people wore. Hey, Mary. Good night. Put these on your brother Aaron and his sons as well, right? Anoint them and ordain them and consecrate them to serve me as priests. You shall also make for them linen breeches to cover their nakedness. They shall extend from their hips to their thighs. And this is their underwear. The linen breeches go on underneath the tunic. This is their underwear. So why does the Torah talk about underwear? Why does it talk about underwear? Well, it's pretty clear that it's not just what people see, but what's underneath, right? And the fact that somebody, I guess other people in other places and with other tunics, don't necessarily, they're not always wearing underwear, but they are when they're performing their work as priests. They have to wear these underwear. So the Torah does tell us that people wear underwear, at least the priests wore underwear, and that was important enough for it to be in the Torah. People have written entire sermons on the priests' underwears. I've seen underwear. I've seen them. I've seen those sermons, which basically remind us that the Torah does care about those kinds of details. But yeah. What is your comment?
So,
Yeah.
It has me go back to Exodus 20:26.
Mm-hmm.
It says that they had the stepped altar.
Yes.
And so the men would ascend to such altars, would expose their nakedness in the presence of God.
Yeah.
Although Aaron and his descendants served at stepped altars, they were instructed to wear linen undergarments.
Yeah. So let's just right after the Ten Commandments. No, right after the Ten Commandments, right at the end of the Parshat Yitro, it does say right there. We did read this.
Exodus 20 verse 26.
Yep. right, well, wait, it's not actually, it is right here. It's 2023 for us, but
Wow.
it's okay. So here's the line. Do not ascend my altar by steps, that your nakedness may not be exposed upon it. So the interesting thing here is that it says you're not supposed to go up steps to an altar, right? So the altar can't be like that. So on one hand, it's kind of prevented by the way the altars are supposed to be built. On the other hand, even if you're not going up on a step, you're still not supposed to be like that. So I guess you could say that, look, you could still have a heavy breeze come by and then people say, I can't unsee that, right? I don't want to see that. So I think people are, listen, the Torah is concerned with the fact that people would still have their dignity when they were like this. Look, there's actually a relevant piece of this, which has nothing to do with us. The Mormons still wear, to this day, people make fun of it, but they wear underwear that some people say looks like long johns, but I'm not making this, so you're looking at me like I'm telling you something. Gloria, you didn't know this? You didn't know about this? Yeah. So it says here, they shall extend from their hips to their thighs. They shall be worn by Aaron and his sons when they enter the tent of meeting or when they approach the altar to officiate in the sanctuary, so that they do not incur punishment and die. It shall be a law for all time for him and for his offspring to come. So, people call these in a derogatory way, the Mormons' magic underwear, but it's not what? 100%. Want me to show you?
I know they wear this.
Okay, but I'm gonna show it to you.
Oh, I knew that.
Okay, but do you see?
They get it from the.
100%. So here you go. Look where it goes.
Yeah.
From your hips to your thighs. It's exactly what it says. So
Usually one piece though, isn't it?
I don't think so. Is it?
Yeah.
Really? I don't know. Anyways, this is the traditional clothes of the LDS church. So virtually, if you're a practicing observant Mormon, this is what you're wearing underneath your clothes at all times.
All the time.
Yes.
All of the times.
With,
All of the times.
and
All the
usually
times.
They're long sleeves. Because we'd square dance and they'd have a short top on, but the long sleeve underwear.
So you see what I'm saying? This is highly relevant. Part of it is because Mormons believe that every male in their group is
Yes,
a priest.
yes, they all are.
Didn't know that.
Yeah.
And so this is why the garments are kept, because so this is and they believe that their churches are temples, right? So they don't see them just as a church, right? They see them as a version of the tabernacle, which is why they call it the tabernacle, right?
Is
They
that
call
why
it
we
the
call
Mormons.
this a synagogue and not a temple?
We're supposed to. I call it a synagogue a lot. I'll call it a shul. I don't feel so comfortable with temple. I actually, if you notice sometimes, if you ever look at my social media posts, I'll say Beth and me. I don't usually say temple Beth and me. I don't say temple Beth and me. I say Beth and me. The reason is because we only had one temple, right? And so so there's a Mormon temple, and then there's also, again, a sense that all of the Mormon, the LDS churches to some extent are holy places, which is why non-Mormons are not allowed to step foot into certain parts of the temple, of every temple, not just the temple in Utah, but the temple on McBean. There's parts of that you and I can't go into.
Right.
Which is why,
There's that big one down the Son of Mount.
yes, which is why non-Mormons cannot go to Mormon weddings, because they're held in a temple and they're not allowed to come into the precinct. So again, it's very similar to what we'll see happen at our temple in Jerusalem, which is that there were parts where non-Jews were not able to go into, and then there were parts where non-Jews could go into. but there were parts where non-Jews couldn't go into. And then there were parts where some Jews couldn't go into, right? Only the priests could go into. And then there was some part of it where not all the priests could go into. Only one priest, the high priest, and that's the Holy of Holies.
This day and age, there's like a conservative rabbi can't go to a reform, a Jewish wedding.
No, they can't go to an interfaith wedding. You can go to a reform wedding, you can't go to an interfaith wedding, which is also broken sometimes, by the way.
It wasn't in Mary's day.
I know, but in some cases they will. And that's also was 30, how many years ago? 30?
20. For us,
How long ago?
27 years.
20, almost 30 years ago.
Yeah.
So things have changed a little bit, but yeah, there are rabbis who would not go to an interfaith wedding even to be present, not to officiate, but to be present because it's seen as an endorsement. An endorsement. Yes, Mike. Yeah. Yes.
I just find it interesting because I went back to see about Adam and Eve, you know?
Yes.
Like,
Yes. About their clothing.
They were naked.
They were naked. Yeah. They were naked and there was nobody else with them. So they didn't, no, but they didn't have the fig leaves until they were naked. No, until they knew they were naked, then they took the leaves. They didn't know. They didn't know and they didn't care that they were naked.
We don't need-
Now I can't unsee that in my head. How do I unsee that in my head?
We need to know that.
So yeah, there is a definite level of knowing and seeing people naked that we didn't have to discuss. By the way, it is important though, because we do know in the story of Noah, right?
Yeah.
Noah, his nakedness is uncovered by his son. And that was enough to get him in trouble. So if you look, so you went back to Genesis, John, go a couple pages further go up to Genesis chapter 10 which is the description of Noah. He got drunk. I think it's at the end of 9 actually, just before 10. So if you go about verse 20.
Now, you looking this up, if you actually know this
No, it's Genesis chapter 9,
here.
We've done it how many times?
verse 20. It says that Noah, yeah, read it. Read when he made the wine.
Then Noah built an altar to the Lord and taking of every clean animal. And
No, yeah, keep going.
Let me stop.
About 20, about verse 20.
Every inch of it in the earth because of man since. by
Yeah.
man are evil from his youth.
Yeah.
So I keep going.
Okay, well, keep going.
And that's why Son, and united son, God blessed Noah and his son and said to them, be fertile and increase. Okay, and with who?
That's it?
And so the earth and tread, you should be upon the beasts of the earth.
Yeah, you're allowed to eat animals.
Okay,
And what, it doesn't say about him planting a vineyard?
and we haven't gotten to, reckon you and like his fellow, maybe it's before.
No, it's chapter 9. I'm looking at it right now.
Okay.
Verse 20.
I must be in the wrong one.
But Noah, a man of the soil, proceeded to plant a vineyard. When he drank some of its wine, he became drunk and he lay uncovered inside his tent. Ham, the father of Canaan, saw his father naked, which is not probably the best translation, but it's okay, and told his 2 brothers outside. So you can see that uncovering nakedness, even within your own family, was considered to be a problem.
How many years from then until now?
From Noah until this point,
Is-
it depends. It depends on, look, if you go by the biblical numbers, it's about 2000, it's about 2,500 years before 2,000 years. Yeah, before from Abraham from Noah to Moses.
That's
It's a long time.
That's a lot of time.
Yeah.
A
But
lot of time, God decided, hey, you know what, wear some clothes.
wear some clothes, but he definitely doesn't want families to see each other naked, let let alone strangers. People in your community shouldn't see you naked.
No,
And yet in the Garden of Eden,
Because there's
It
only
was
two
fine.
people. Because there's only two people,
right,
husband and
Yeah,
wife,
that's-
husband and wife.
it's a lot of years of God still managing the earth.
Yes. Well, he's got to still coach us a little bit, right? We're still needing a little coaching.
yeah.
So so the point is that about 2,000 years ago, the Jewish people felt we were done with the coaching. That God, we said to God, I think you've given us the rules now. It's time for you to cut us loose. So that was 2,000 years ago. Some people felt that was premature. Some people felt it was the right time. I don't know. Go back and forth on that issue. Yeah. There's some people who felt it was too soon. All right, so let's take a look at chapter 29. This is what you shall do in consecrating them to serve me as priests. So now we actually get into a description of what happens when you actually make these guys priests. Now, what's interesting is we will read this in Leviticus, a version of this. And again, which one existed first? Well, we get this first because we get it in Exodus. Was it written before Leviticus? It might have been. It also could have been written by two slightly different hands, but the similarities are extensive between here and Leviticus. And you'll see that the same kinds of things go on throughout the Bible, which when it comes to sacrifices, there's a couple things that are real important. But this is the first time we've really had like the commandments of how we're supposed to sacrifice, because we did get it at Passover, but that's a different kind of sacrifice. That's a sacrifice you actually eat of, that everybody eats of. It's not a priest doing it for you. You're doing it for yourself. We read about Abraham sacrificing and Isaac and Jacob. They all sacrificed. But there's something that's different now, which is that we're actually going to have priests do it for us. And so the instructions are very specific, and some things, again, maybe were going on from the very beginning, back from Abraham, and actually, as John just read, Noah sacrifices. So even before we get to the first Jew, which is Abraham and Sarah, there were sacrifices going on during Noah's time. And actually, of course, Cain and Abel sacrificed. Remember, that's how Cain and Abel got into a fight, because God liked Cain's sacrifice not as much as his brother Abel. Abel had a better sacrifice. So sacrificing has been going on for a long time, for at least according to the Bible, since the beginning of human experience, or at least human awareness from the time of Cain and Abel. But now we're going to have directions for it. And God's basically saying, you got priests now who are in charge of it. Now, by the way, this is a major shift in the Bible. And we take it for granted because we read it all the time and we don't think about it. We're just there, so we don't question it. But what I just told you is a huge shift, because the idea that you and I and anybody else can go in their backyard and have a sacrifice to God was probably the way Jewish people lived for a very, very long time. And for those of us who are in the Tuesday morning class, we get into this issue a lot because there's a big issue by the time we get to the book of Kings, where the people who are writing the book of Kings, the people who wrote the book of Samuel, and pretty much again from the book of Deuteronomy on, as you'll see, you don't have the ability or the right to offer a sacrifice anywhere you want. You go to Jerusalem for the sacrifice, period. And don't do it in your backyard, and don't have anybody who's not a priest do it. You can't do it. The Levites can't do it. Anybody but the priest is doing it. They're doing it wrong, and they're upsetting God. Now, what we're going to see here in the Torah right now is the beginning of that shift. Understand that shift took hundreds of years for it to set in. And it was a major fight amongst the Jewish community, because there were a lot of people who said, that's not true. That's not true. My sacrifice in my backyard with my local priest or with my own father or mother is just as good as the sacrifice you're telling me that we have to do in Jerusalem. So it was a big, big issue. And we take it for granted because we're living thousands of years later and we don't offer sacrifices, and the whole thing seems kind of weird. And we like, who even cares? But they cared about it, and they fought and died over this issue. And again, you're saying, well, People have fought and died over religious issues for a long time. Yeah, and it happened within the Jewish people. I will tell you that we haven't fought and died and killed each other over religious issues for the most part amongst the Jewish community for the last 2,000 years. The priesthood and what went on at the temple and what the roles of the priests are and the fact that there were priests and only priests was a big issue for a very long time in Jewish history, about 1,000 years. And the fact that there were even, it's the last thing that Jews killed each other really over. The last thing that they killed each other over was who could be the priest. By the time of Jesus, no one argued over whether you could only offer sacrifices in Jerusalem. Nobody during Jesus's time was offering a sacrifice in their backyard.
Stopped after the second temple.
I understand, but what I'm saying is, at that time, from the time the Jews came back from Babylonia, nobody argued about where to offer sacrifices anymore. It's not quite true, but for the most part, trust me when I tell you, there was no argument over Jerusalem being the place.
That's why you would always have, for the holidays, people would congregate.
By Jesus's time, no one argued about that. Everyone came to Jerusalem.
Right.
Jesus came, exactly. Jesus came to Jerusalem. Everybody came to Jerusalem for the sacrifices. The problem was, by that point, where Jews, I said, were still killing each other over the priesthood, was who could be priest,
Right.
who was going to be priest, who bought the priesthood from the Romans. Because by that point, the Romans were auctioning off the priesthood to the highest bidder. And that was really upsetting Jews because they said there's too many illegitimate priests that did nothing but buy their spot as a priest. And people did die over that. They killed each other over who could be priest. So it was an issue.
Was there educational system?
For priests?
Like a rabbinical school back
Yeah, the priests had to go through the training, but clearly there were people who were not competent at it because we hear about those discussions.
Is it Cohen's though that were?
Yeah, there were people who were incompetent. They said this guy shouldn't be priest. Or were they saying that because they didn't want him to be priest? But regardless, the problem is that it was a bought position and everybody knew that. It was a bought position.
What happened, 50 years ago in high holidays, you brought a leader.
I understand, but that makes people upset during the high holidays. When your whole religious system is controlled by people who have bought their position, it has no legitimacy. And that's why people were like, this is all a joke. This is stupid. So by the time the temple was destroyed, there were probably a lot of Jews who sat back and said, you know what? We don't need it anymore. But it still was a very traumatic thing to have Jerusalem and the temple be destroyed.
That's what happened during that.
Well,
The changes between the priesthood and the sages and then the rabbis.
Well, thankfully, there was an emergent study of an application of Judaism that had nothing to do with the priesthood. But who knows what would have happened if, who knows? I mean, it's difficult to say. It is what it is.
But the changeover must have been so traumatic.
Well, it wasn't automatic.
No, of
Mike.
course not.
Didn't happen overnight. But here we have this description. Let's get back to the beginning of the priesthood. And what it comes down to is this. This is what you do in consecrating them to serve me as priests. Take a young bull of the herd and 2 rams without blemish, also unleavened bread, so matzah, unleavened cakes, which are also some type of matzah, but these have oil mixed in, and unleavened wafers spread with oil. Make these of choice wheat and flour. Now you can see everything that's being offered, animal and also grain product, all has to be it all has to be the best animals without blemish. You can't give God bad stuff. And so you give God these beautiful cakes as well. So, well, look what happens here. Place them in one basket and present them in the basket along with the bull and the 2 rams. Lead Aaron and his sons up to the tent of meeting and wash them with water. Take these vestments and clothe Aaron with the tunic, the robe of the ephod and the breastpiece, and gird him with the decorated band of the ephod. Put the headdress on his head and place the holy diadem, which is another word for crown, upon the headdress. And take the anointing oil and pour it on his head and anoint him. Now that is the first time that he becomes a priest. This is what you're supposed to do. And we're going to read about this exact same anointing consecration in Leviticus, in the next book of the Bible, that they actually go through this thing. They go through it. Then it says, then bring his sons forward, clothe them with tunics and wind turbans upon them and gird both Aaron and his sons with sashes. So the priesthood, and so they will have the priesthood as their right for all time. You shall ordain Aaron and his sons, lead the bull up to the front of the tent of meeting, and let Aaron and his sons lay their hands upon the head of the bull. Slaughter the bull before Adonai, the entrance of the tent of meeting, and take some of the bull's blood and put it on the horns of the altar with your finger. Then pour out the rest of the blood at the base of the altar. Take all the fat that covers the entrails, the protuberance of the liver, and the two kidneys and with the fat on them, and turn them on into smoke on the altar. The rest of the flesh of the bull, its hide and its dung, shall be put into the fire outside the camp. It is a sin offering. Okay, so this is what happens with the bull. Now, if you notice, they took the fat and the entrails, or the fat of the entrails, this piece of the liver, which again, there's an interesting kind of understanding that the liver contains some of the essence of life, if you will. The kidneys, which are also important organs, and those are all burnt. Now, parts of the bull that were considered to be not useful and not smelling good and not, I mean, the hide and the dung, that's not going to create a very good smell. Those you do not burn on the altar. You take those outside. Now it says, and we're not done yet with these, take the one ram and let Aaron and his sons lay their hands upon that ram's head. Slaughter the ram and take its blood and dash it against all the sides of the altar. Cut up the ram into sections with its entrails and legs and put them with its quarter and its head. Turn all the ram into smoke upon the altar. It is a burnt offering to Adonai and a pleasing odor, an offering by fire to the Lord. Now, it did not say to take all the rest of the bull and offer it up on the altar. It says the ram you're going to turn into smoke, but it did not say that about the bull. We'll get back to that. Take the other ram and let Aaron and his sons lay their hands upon the ram's head. Slaughter that ram and take some of its blood and put it on the ridge of Aaron's right ear and on the ridges of his sons' right ears and on the thumbs of their right hands and on the big toes of their feet, and dash the rest of the blood against every side of the altar round about. Now, again, this is only the first time that you're dedicating the altar. You don't do this every time. This is only the first time that you're dedicating the altar that it says to do this. Take some of the blood that is on the altar and some of the anointing oil and sprinkle it upon Aaron and his vestments, and also upon his sons and his sons' vestments. Thus he and his vestments will be holy, as well as all his sons and his sons' vestments. Now, what of course is so strange about all this is that the blood is what purifies the priests and what makes them ready to be priests. And it seems so strange that you're taking blood and literally purifying things with the blood. You're purifying the altar with the blood. You're purifying the corners. You put it on the corners of the altar, and you put it on the corners of the people. You put it on the tips of their fingers, on their ears, on the ends of their body, if you will, by literally saying that these places are going to be made holy, the points of contact between God and them. Yes.
When you were studying this,
Yes.
this is a horrific scene.
Yeah.
It's a horrific scene.
Yes.
The animal's not going down easy. It's a big animal.
Yep.
Slaughtering one of God's creatures.
Yep.
There's got to be some other. I need some notes from someone at the time. Explain.
So Glory, what are do any of your notes tell John why this is going? No. So the
picture, right?
I understand. So the notes are not providing you with an answer. I don't know if there is a good answer, but let's see what Glory says.
Which one?
For any of the blood stuff that as John saying, it's very gory, Glory.
It's a big animal coming in here.
Yeah.
It's a big animal coming in here.
A lot of blood.
He's going down. Hard.
Whatever. It's a big animal, right? It's several hundred pounds.
Picture the scene.
Yeah.
You know, it's kind of like people are going, really? We got to do this.
And remember, this is happening every day. and multiple times a day. This ritual is only for the putting the blood on the ears and putting it on the altar or spreading around the altar is only for the dedication. Now, later on, as we're going to read in Achrei Mot, we read it at Yom Kippur, it was actually your son's portion. What happens in Achrei Mot is that we have to rededicate the temple after it's dedicated, because we'll read in Leviticus, and really the only narrative in Leviticus, that people screw up and they have to restart. On the day that they dedicate it, they mess up. So there has to be a re-letting of blood, if you will, to re-purify it. And of course, that purification ritual becomes the ritual that we do every Yom Kippur.
God created Earth.
Yeah,
I'm going to go on a limb and
Yep.
assume he created some other Earths. Maybe.
Yeah.
I'm just go with me here.
yep,
He's more sophisticated than any of us.
right.
And this is such a primal.
Mm-hmm.
There's no other better way.
Yep. Yeah, no, let's hold that. Let's see what Glory's,
There's nothing
anything that,
It's-
no, I'm kidding. Seeing if her Bible helps at all. What does your Bible say, Glory?
specifically about the flood, but it's just what it symbolizes.
That's exactly it. That's what it's, back
Um,
then.
It's a
There's
symbol,
nothing else to symbolize
yeah,
dedication than blood.
the symbol of the animals becoming their substitute and transferring their sins to the sin bearer.
I don't know, what Moses did to go up to the mountain was pretty, that takes time and energy and patience and faith.
Yeah.
And faith.
So the Romans destroy the temple, and it puts an end to this 2,000 years ago. There are no more sacrifices. Done. It doesn't happen anymore. Can't do it. There's no temple. There's no priesthood. Well, there's a priesthood, but there's no temple, and there's no priesthood that's kosher anymore to do this. So it goes away. Now, as I told you already, there were a lot of people by that point who said, good riddance, we don't need it anymore. So the question then is, why was it ever there? Your question, which is a very important question, why would God demand sacrifices of any animal, of anything? Now, the rabbis asked this question thousands of years ago, but they asked it right after the temple was destroyed. Well, within a few hundred years at least of when the temple was destroyed. And their answer, and the answer that develops over the Middle Ages, and we see it in Maimonides, 1,000 years ago, they're still discussing it. Because 1,000 years ago, maybe they're thinking, maybe we'll reinstate the temple. Look, there's still people today who talk about reinstating the temple. But 1,000 years ago, during Maimonides' time, let's say 1100s, look, the Muslims had only been around for 300 or 400 years. I think there was a point in time where maybe Jews thought, maybe God will let them come back to Jerusalem and reestablish the temple. I can only tell you that at a certain point, by Maimonides' time, Maimonides starts to say, maybe there'll be a third temple that'll be reestablished. But Maimonides was one of the first to come out and say, but there won't be a sacrificial situation anymore. He says, we won't have to do it anymore. And the reason he starts to put out there for us, and he's a very rational philosopher. I mean, Maimonides was loved by Muslims and by Christians too, because of his approach to philosophy. He didn't come out of nowhere. He was influenced by Muslim and Christian philosophers before him. It's not like he operated in a vacuum, but he said, look, sacrifice helped us when we were in a position in human evolution where people still needed to have this stuff. What his point was, is that when Jews were essentially, I'm summarizing it, but essentially what he said is when Jews were sacrificing animals, everyone else was sacrificing humans.
I was gonna bring that up.
Huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, children.
So when during the Roman era, even people were still sacrificing humans. I mean, people we know were sacrificing humans when Cortez and when people came to the New World and stopped Aztecs from sacrificing humans. People said, you can't sacrifice humans. And that was 500 years ago in North America. So people practice human sacrifice, and left to their own devices, you can make the argument, would practice human sacrifice because they felt that somehow God demanded that. So whether it was sacrificing your enemies or whether it was sacrificing because God must demand a human sacrifice to make the rain come or to make up for our sins, people felt that a sacrifice of a human was necessary. Judaism fought against that, according to Maimonides, and said, no, God doesn't want human sacrifices. And so God allowed us to have animal sacrifices.
But other parts of the world were sacrificed, not just humans, but they were also sacrificing animals too.
Well, yeah, and so Maimonides said, by the time the temple was destroyed, when God allowed, and his position is God allowed the temple to be destroyed, because clearly if God didn't want the temple to be destroyed, God wouldn't let it be destroyed. It's God's house. He felt that by that point, and again, by his point, God didn't need sacrifice anymore because people didn't have that impulse anymore. They had evolved to the point where they didn't need to have sacrifices anymore. And again, Maimonides is writing in Spain and in North Africa and in the Middle Ages, when most of the people, everyone he's coming into contact with is either Muslim or Christian or Jewish. So nobody's demanding animal sacrifices anymore. But people did demand animal sacrifices, and before that they demanded human sacrifice. So Maimonides felt that there was an evolution. It went from human sacrifice to animal sacrifice, and then to no sacrifice. And so God doesn't need that anymore. Not that God ever needed it, but God needed to get us to wean us off of this impulse that we had for that. And so he said, when the temple is reestablished, there will be no need for it anymore because people don't have that need anymore. Some people posit, and I'm not saying he said it, but some people posit that his idea was that in the future, sometime in the future, that people would be vegetarian. They wouldn't need to have meat anymore. They wouldn't need to have a sacrifice because perhaps he saw that human beings would evolve to a point where they didn't need to have animals.
By the time the second temple was destroyed, there were Hebrews or Jews, whatever you want to call them, all over the place. Now, you have them in Babylon that never came back.
Yeah.
They couldn't get to Jerusalem.
So that's an interesting discussion too, which is by the time of the Romans, the majority of Jews in the world did not live in Israel.
Right.
A fraction of them lived in Israel. So there were more Jews that lived in Egypt. At that point, when the temple was destroyed by the Romans, there were more Jews living in Egypt than there were living in Israel. We know that. Josephus tells us that. Other historians tell us that. The Romans tell us that. We know that. There are more Jews in Alexandria than there are in Jerusalem. And the country of Egypt has more Jews. It's a bigger country and it's had a bigger population, bigger urban population. So we know that. So yes, there were people who wouldn't go to Jerusalem, who didn't care to go to Jerusalem, which is why you have the development of synagogues in these places. So this is what Mike was saying before, that there was a transition though from the temple to a synagogue. So there were already synagogues around the world, and there were synagogues in Israel. And so people were already studying and already worshiping God in synagogues. They'd already developed prayer. So when the temple was destroyed, it's not like they were left with like, what do we do now? The question was only, oh, we don't have the temple now, so we'll only be able to go to synagogue now. But there were a lot of priests who weren't very happy about it. Now, if the priests who watched the temple be destroyed, the first few generations are sitting there going, well, we got to bring the temple back. We got to rebuild the temple. How's God going to be worshiped if we don't build the temple? This is all these guys ever did. They've been doing it for 1,000 years. Their family are going back to Aaron. And by the way, we know that that's true. The DNA tells us that they knew that they were priests and they knew that this had been what their family had been doing for generations. They wanted to continue the tradition. They felt they had to continue the tradition. They were willing to die for it. Some of them were faced with a really interesting dilemma, because they either had to figure out a new job, a new gig, and some of them did become rabbis and started following rabbinic tradition, and some of them probably just checked out. And some of them, many of these people that were called the Sadducees, and the church writes about them, or at least the Gospels writes about them in not very positive ways, because they didn't like Jesus. They didn't like the fact that people were saying, like Jesus said, you don't have to have sacrifices. No, they came from the Pharisees.
Right.
Now, the church is also somewhat condescending to Pharisees, but that's almost because they're so much like them. And there's, you know, a real feeling that Jesus was following Pharisaic tradition. You know, the Pharisees are the proto rabbis. They're the rabbis. They are the people who become rabbis, if you will. But they were in opposition to the Sadducees because they didn't believe that you had to have a temple. Now, here's the strange thing. As literally 40 years before the temple was destroyed, you have Jesus. And some people felt that Jesus was the last sacrifice. That's why I was going to say, if anything in your Bible had any references to that. Because what happened is that at that time, exactly at the time that, again, Maimonides is saying, well, we developed that we didn't have to have a sacrifice anymore. Some people felt in a strange way, and maybe it resonated for them, was that, yeah, the final seal of sacrifice is Jesus. There doesn't need to be another sacrifice. Now you're making a face now, Mike, but there were clearly Jews
saying that if it was the sacrifice, you're going back years and saying the Jews killed Jesus.
No. I'm saying that early Christians, including early Jews, would have said yes, and that sacrifice is the last sacrifice. Because what happens is that you have an extremely bloody situation here with Jesus where, and again, we know he's one of 1 million Jews that were crucified. But the fact that people would say that at that same time, people are saying, well, we had one final human sacrifice. Now we would say, but you can't have a human sacrifice. But if you read it on a global level, and what some people probably did was saying, well, isn't that the right sign? Isn't that the right seal, is to say there is a final human sacrifice and now there doesn't have to be a temple anymore. And that's what people said. There were people who said that. And again, most of them didn't say that, but there were some who said it. And to some extent, the Christian Bible gave people that option. You don't seem to like that, but I'm just telling you, there were thousands of people who said it.
You know, going back to the Hebrews, the Jews, I call them Hebrews, I don't know when they became Jews, that they didn't do human sacrifice.
All I'm saying is that you can look, when people have something catastrophic happen in their lives, and the temple being destroyed was a global catastrophe for the Jews. People put those things into context. And as much as human sacrifice was frowned upon, then people said, but this was the exception. I know, but I'm just saying, if people saw that this was the exception, then it could explain, it gave an explanation for them. And that's what some people looked for. And again, why? Because it happened in the same times. Now, again, maybe that's why it happened. I mean, that's why you could say that people wanted that kind of answer, because they had a global catastrophe. But the rabbis gave this other option that had been going on for a few hundred years, which is, hey, God doesn't need a temple. It's not an answer for everybody, but it was an answer for most Jews. And so rabbinic Judaism emerged out of that. Look, the Essenes, we don't even know what they did. Once the temple was destroyed, what did they do? Because they had nothing to do. They had nothing to do. So did some of them become Christian? Maybe not, because the Christian Bible isn't very favorable to them, but maybe some of them opted. There was probably some Sadducees who said, you know what? There's no purpose on us even existing anymore. Let's stop having kids. The Talmud says there were Jews who stopped having kids. They said, it's over.
I read it.
He talks about all the groups.
Yeah, he does.
He talks about all the groups, and he said they didn't get along. But he doesn't say what happened to him because it's still too soon. He's writing in 70.
Yeah.
But he doesn't talk about Christianity. He doesn't write about Christianity. So it hadn't happened yet, but it may have happened within 20 or 30 years. But again, we don't know how many Jews, we really don't know how many Jews came about and followed Christianity. We do know that that wasn't the majority of Christians within 2 generations. Within 100 years of Jesus, most Christians are not Jewish. The original Christians were all Jewish. But within 2 generations, guys, the majority of people were not. So, correct. But it also gives you the idea that, again, the original group of Christians was probably a couple hundred people, according to the Christian Bible. So, What we know is that this period of time was a crucible for stuff that even at the time, people couldn't understand how big it was going to be. And thankfully, we have Josephus. The problem with Josephus is that most people don't know him. They've never read him. They don't know that it exists.
I didn't know him until you gave me the books to read. I thought it was that.
But we don't understand, like, that's our witness, and we have a witness to it. We had a witness, and the Romans were witnesses to it, and the rabbis were witnesses to it. But everybody has their own agenda. Everybody has their own agenda, and Josephus has his own agenda too. Hillel was one of the rabbis, though, but we don't know what he says about it. He doesn't talk about it. He doesn't talk about the priests in particular.
So, I know the name Maimonides, but I don't. know
Right.
much. So
But he's literally 1,200 years later.
So it's interesting though, right? Because you brought up. Because the brutality of, what's the right word, of the anointing, not the anointing, of the,
Sprinkling, yeah.
of the validation, whatever the proper word is of the temple, right? And then when the second temple was destroyed, right, which I'm assuming they must have done the same thing, right? The Talmud, right?
Yeah, but there's no cleanup for it, though.
Right, but the Talmud became so important because of the dysphoria. Everybody was. Listen, I'm not an expert. I'm just reading about this because it's so interesting. And so it wasn't about the synagogue. It was about the Talmud, right?
Well, yeah.
And so
Yeah.
there was no need for sacrifice at that moment because there was no other temples coming.
And there was no building that was that important. That's why no building for the Jewish people is ever going to be important again.
That we learn more about that time.
I would argue it's the most important time to.
I don't know where you're going unless you know you're.
Yeah, but if you don't understand that period 2,000 years ago, during the time of the Romans, you don't understand the most important period of time in human history. When people ask me all the time, if you go back in time, I'd go back to that time. There's not even a close second. I would, well, maybe 1776, but I would say but we have enough. I can imagine that a little bit. I want to see this period 2,000 years ago. I want to see how, well, because there's not enough teaching about any part of history, but what's problematic for people about this period of time 2,000 years ago is that, well, first of all, Christians are going to get very bent out of shape if you show any depictions of Christians that are problematic. And so we know that there's a lot of different forms of Christianity that are developing at the time, right? There's different. Christianity is still in formation, right? So there's not a Christianity, but people don't want to see that. And within the rabbinic tradition, it's not like Jews are going to get bent out of shape if you show this, but it is problematic from the standpoint of, like, even if you show images of it, some people get very angry. They get traumatized by it.
Why would they get that on shit? They were having a hard time over how many years did they decide how many different Episcopalian.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know, right? Right, everybody had these branches.
Listen,
going on.
when they made The Last Temptation of Christ with Willem Dafoe, people went nuts. They were camping out on Lou Wasserman's front lawn, and they were threatening his life, and they went crazy. Now, again, there were parts of that book which was not written by, it was written by a Greek Orthodox person, but the point is that people got very upset with the depiction of Jesus on that. People obviously got very bent out of shape with the Passion of the Christ, largely because of the depictions of Jews, and because, as it turned out, and as it was later obvious, that Mel Gibson had a very deep anti-Semitic streak in him. So the fact that was exposed after the fact kind of confirmed what we thought, which is, wow, this is very anti-Semitic, this movie. So the point is that the pieces of this get so the elements are so upsetting for people that you almost are struck from the very beginning. So you almost have to come around it from the other side. So one of the more successful treatments of this period, but it doesn't really deal with Judea a lot, but it deals with Judea a little bit, and Jews at that time, is a show that they made called Rome, which was done a few years ago, which was basically set in Rome, and it was with two centurions who essentially are, it's like a cop buddy drama set within the Roman, it what? Which?
You and I talked about it. It's a documentary. It's by Jody Magnus.
Yeah, but no, there are some very good documentaries about it.
It was a 12-part series that we did in Sedona. And I'm telling you, I learned so much.
Listen,
Not a lot, it's like, you brought in a lot, but you didn't dive in.
so there's good documentaries about it. Not great, I don't think, but there's some good documentaries.
Good.
But the point is that people always get more captivated with drama, right? And so when you see these things and kind of imagine them, and rather than treat them as a scholarly thing, but try to bring out the emotions and try to bring out the passions and the dialogue, what would have actually happened in these discussions, it is really much more powerful. I've always argued that there should have been somebody should do a great miniseries on Josephus, on his life, because his life was ridiculously, like almost unbelievable in the way that he lived. The fact that he started out as a Jewish soldier who gets captured and then becomes a Jewish historian in Rome. It's a crazy story. I mean, some people would say he's a traitor. Other people say he's the ultimate survivor. The fact that he could have survived, being in these situations. He was married 4 times. I mean, the things about him that he recounts is it's really mind blowing that there was a guy who actually lived through these things and actually was there as a witness. He describes Masada. He's the one that we learned about Masada from. So people know about Josephus, but they don't really know him, and they don't understand how complex and how dramatic his life was. So that you could do something around that. You could build it around that, but he wrote in Greek. Yeah, but he wrote for a Roman audience. He wrote for a Gentile audience. He was not writing for Jews. He was writing for a Roman audience, but he wrote a very detailed history of the Jews called Antiquities, and then he wrote a history of the war called the War of the Jews. He also wrote a couple other things, including he also wrote an autobiography, Josephus, but he wrote about this, and he was a priest. He was from a priestly family. So,
Not to belabor this, not to go on anymore, but I can appreciate that human evolves, not the right word, whatever word you want to use, mature out of sacrificing animal or human, right? All that. But the fact that God, right, to get back to it, asked for this, right? That's the thing that's really, that's what's got me so puzzled.
So what?
Because it's so
it's detailed.
It's simple. It's what's the right word? It's I don't want to say something silly.
No, but listen, some people make the argument, John, that the reason why we have these descriptions of it, these detailed descriptions of it, is so that people don't go off and do whatever they want. That it's best if we contain the sacrifices, that we don't let people, we give them the only things that they can do. And if they do that, they won't do a bunch of kind of crazy stuff. So everything has to be laid out. Again, the irony, of course, is that we read this and we haven't done it for a long time. But there are people who still study this. There are tractates of the Talmud. A good chunk of the Talmud are further descriptions of this. And again, in the descriptions of the stuff, they also go into some other interesting stories and interesting lessons and laws. But there are tractates on the holy objects that were in the Talmud and in the temple, and the Talmud recounts those. So there's six sections of the Mishnah, which are then elaborated in the rest of the Talmud. And of those 6 sections, 2 of those 6 sections deal with the priestly stuff. So 1/3 of the Talmud, 1/3 of the Mishnah, and arguably, again, I wouldn't say 1/3 of the Talmud, but a good chunk of the Talmud deals with priestly stuff. And they were writing, by the way, in the Talmud, in some cases, 400 years, 500 years after the temple was destroyed. So the fact that they were still writing about it and they are still concerned with it indicates that either they thought it was going to come back, or they felt this stuff still needs to be explained. And there are people who study this stuff It ain't me. It is not me, because every time this stuff is described, I have to go back and look at pictures and try to imagine how this looked on somebody. And there are people who, man, they have the details down in their head. And as we've talked about before, there is the Ateret Kohanim. There are the people in Jerusalem who have recreated every single thing that we have here on this list. Every single thing that we're being described.
How about just show up and pray?
What?
How about just show up and pray? Why kill something?
Well, because they believe that if God is going to, if God's going to come back, he's going to, with his temple, we've got to, well, I'll show you this because they're about,
I guess that's my point. I mean,
they're-
we're not point now.
they're about, no, it's okay. They're about to come back into, they're about to come back into a little bit more power. This is a Ateret Kohanim. These are the people who are, returning, reclaiming, and rebuilding the United Jerusalem. But some of the things that they do, and they definitely are looking for money from fundamentalist Christians. Well, they don't have it. Maybe let me just see if, they don't have they're kind of keeping this stuff. They're keeping this stuff on, they're kind of keeping this stuff on, not on the front of their stuff, but these are people who are reclaiming Jerusalem, but they're also rebuilding the temple. So we'll see. In Jerusalem, these people
Are
are
they gonna want to do a sacrifice?
maybe.
Symbolic?
No, they'll not do a symbolic one. They'll do these people will do real sacrifices if they have their way, these are people who want to rebuild the temple and rebuild it in Jerusalem, and they're backed by evangelical Christians who want that to happen too.
In ancient times.
Yeah, these are people who have millions of dollars and they're spending it, they're spending it on here's,
Similar to the Karaites?
oh, no, this is these are, I mean, they like, this is one of the things, I'll show you one of the things that you can see in Jerusalem that the people have built, and this is out in public, like you can see this. This is something that they built you can see this in Jerusalem. This is the golden menorah they've built. You can see this right out by the wall. So this is, they're ready to go with at least the menorah. They've put that out in public, but they also have all the priestly vestments that they've created too. So,
Are they trying to build it in the same location?
yeah.
What are they
Not
gonna
go
do with
over well with them others?
It's not going to go over well. So that's why the people that are seeing this happen will say either God's going to perform a great big miracle and raise up the Dome of the Rock right off there, or it's going to require World War III. So for people who have a vision of Armageddon, it kind of it starts right there in Jerusalem. It starts right in Israel. So
In
yeah.
the Christian book of Revelations, it does talk about that.
yeah, and it's an important part of the whole story as it plays out. Is that, yeah, it will start World War III, and people would say, but that's exactly what's supposed to happen. So yeah, the fact that you and I will say, well, that'll start World War III, they'll say, yeah, you're exactly right. That's what we want. That's what we want. So it's part of a worldview that some people have. So again, I'm not, and by the way, Mike just said it's going to happen anyways. There are people who feel that way, but I will tell you that it's an interesting thing to hear that people are living with that view, both in the Jewish world and in the evangelical world. So let's get back to the offerings. So it says, add one flat loaf of bread. No, but it's why we're doing this. One cake of oil bread and one wafer from the basket of unleavened bread that is before Adonai. Place all these in the palms of Aaron and his sons and offer them as an elevation offering before Adonai. Take them from their hands and turn them into smoke upon the altar with the burnt offering as a pleasing odor before Adonai. It is an offering by fire to him. Take the breast of Aaron's ram of ordination and offer it as an elevation offering before Adonai. It shall be your portion. So this is an interesting thing. This is actually saying that, part of the ram is being offered up on your behalf. You shall consecrate the breast that was offered as an elevation offering and the thigh that was offered as a gift offering from the ram of ordination, from that which was from that which was Aaron's and from that which was his son's, and take those parts, and those parts shall be due for a time from the Israelites to Aaron and for his sons, for they are a gift, and so there shall be a gift from the Israelites, their gift to Adonai, out of all their sacrifices of well-being. And these are offerings that are offered up according to this. This is actually part of what's going to be offered up all the time. They've kind of laid that out. We'll see it. Well, we'll see it a lot when we get to Leviticus. Now, the sacral vestments of Aaron shall pass on to his sons after him for them to be anointed and ordained in. He among his sons who becomes priest in his stead, who enters the tent of meeting to officiate within the sanctuary, shall wear them 7 days. So when Aaron is done with his vestments, they're passed on to the son who will carry after him as the high priest. And it says, he shall wear them for 7 days. You shall take the ram of ordination and boil its flesh in the sacred precinct. And Aaron and his son shall eat of the ram and the bread that is in the basket at the entrance of the tent of meeting. These things shall be eaten only by those for whom expiation was made with them, and they were ordained and consecrated. They may not be eaten by a layperson, for they are holy. So here's what it just said. Not all of the animal was burned up. We haven't even gotten to the bull, but even of the ram, it says that the priest and his sons get to eat of that animal. So it's not all burnt up, and not all the bread is burned up. The rest of the stuff, except for we read about some of it, the initial stuff is placed in his palms that are burned up, but it doesn't say the whole thing is burned up. Part of it is eaten by them, and it says specifically that they have to eat it in the temple precinct. They cannot take it home in a doggy bag. It is not eaten as a offering or as food. It is literally them eating it as part of the offering. So the priests eating it in the temple actually is a holy act. It is not just for food for them. This is actually them doing something inside the temple precinct, and nobody else can eat it.
Nobody, including the rest of their family.
It says not even their children or their wives, right? They're only for those people.
Okay, so this whole thing is a holy act, right? Act is not the right word.
Uh-huh.
A holy. I mean, you would think that the bull and the ram should come from very special herds,
Uh-huh.
right? Not
Yeah.
just the average bull, not just the average. I mean,
Yes.
chain of whatever you want to call it. Right?
Yep.
Otherwise, I'll just bring anybody.
Yep.
Well, the ram has to be
Without blemish, I understand, but what John's actually saying was what happened. So look, these laws are being given to them when they're still in the wilderness, right? They're still outside of the land of Israel. When they come into the land of Israel and they have the temple, 100%, there were only special flocks that they took these things from. Now, what's even crazier is that we're about to get into it. We're just starting to see the fact that these are not just the one-time things. So you're starting to hear that they're saying, well, they're starting to let it slip, that this isn't just for the inauguration, that we're starting to see, and this is what you do whenever you eat it. Well, now we're going to get to the fact that there are daily offerings. So they have these daily offerings, and they have sin offerings, and then they have free will offerings, and they have elevation offerings. All of these offerings that they're offering every day, and it really would have come out to thousands of offerings. These priests eventually are working all day long, and they're constantly offering up sacrifices, which means that there's a lot of animals that are being killed. It also means that there's a lot of meat, and there's a lot of leftovers, because not all the animals are being eaten. So if they're not all being eaten where they're going, and they're going to the priests. Now, what also happens is that as the community grows, they can't possibly all offer up these sacrifices. So eventually the priests say, you don't have to offer up the sacrifices, you just have to give us the money. And then we have a problem. Because this system only works if there's only a few thousand people, this thing can work. But if there's millions of people, and the people, as we said, 2/3 of them are living outside the land of Israel. If they're living in Egypt, if they're living in Turkey, if they're living in Rome, if they're living in Arabia, everywhere by this point, Iran, all of these places, they're sending money. They're not sending animals. And so there's millions of dollars that are coming through the temple. And so by the point in time where the Romans are now in charge, when the Jewish diaspora is huge, what happens? The Romans are in control. And I know we're skipping ahead 1,000 years, but what's critical about this is this system doesn't work because there's so much money here because they can't kill all these animals. There's no way they could kill all these animals. And so they take the money and the priests get the money. But what happens is when the Romans are in control, they recognize that they're the ones who actually get to be in power. And so they select who gets to be the priest. And who gets to be the priest? The person who kicks back the most money to them. And so the Romans would literally have families of priests that would bid against each other to be the priest. And when they wanted more money, they would just say, well, if you want to be in control now, you've got to pay us. Now you'd say, well, how did they figure that out? Well, it was a really big problem because the Romans would say, okay, your family now, you paid the most money, you can be the priest. Well, they would take all that money, and it's kind of like we were talking about buying a lottery ticket. They would pay, let's say, $1 million to be priest, but they got $2 million for being a priest. So there was incentive in doing it. But the problem is what happens if the Romans then tomorrow say, yeah, you're not priest anymore. We got your $1 million, but now we want $1 million from that guy. And that's what the Romans did. The Romans literally would try to figure out how they could mess up the next guy after he paid. The Maccabees were already, it was already messed up by the Maccabean period. But the Maccabees are only 150 years before. So by the Maccabean period, there's already a large diaspora. There's already too many Jews for this. This system doesn't work with 1 million people. It definitely doesn't work with 5 million people. There's no question it doesn't work with 8 million people. And we think the Jewish community at the time of the Romans, the time the temple was destroyed, that there might have been up to 8 million Jews worldwide.
Really?
Yeah.
There's not much more than that now.
Correct.
That maybe double that.
Yeah, but if we do DNA tests on people, we might find there's a lot more. But anyways, that's not the point. The point is that 8 million Jews, say 2 million or 3 million are living in Israel. Another million are living in Turkey. Another 2 million, 3 million are living in Egypt. You know, there's 1 million living in Rome and the rest of Europe. I mean, it wasn't that. Well, by that point, maybe. But maybe there might even be, we don't know how many Romans were in China by that period. We don't really know. But the point is there Jews are everywhere by this period. So how many there are? Maybe there's 8 million. Maybe, we don't know. But if there were, we think 1 million were killed during the war against the Romans. 1 million, 1.5 million were killed. Yeah. Maybe more. Maybe more. Killed, I mean, murdered and killed in battle. But let's just say it's 2 million or 3 million. There's still too many people to sustain a priesthood that is sacrificing every day for them. Can't do it. So they had a lot of money, and it took a lot of money. You can imagine if every Jew in the world sent in, $1 for the priest. Well, it wouldn't be that much money. But of course, guess what? By the time of the Romans, there weren't just Jews sending money to the priests. There were Gentiles that were doing it too.
Really?
Lots of Gentiles.
Why?
Because they liked what they saw.
Huh.
Why? Because the biggest temple in the world, guys, the biggest temple in the world was in Jerusalem. Now you could say, well, they had big, beautiful temples in Rome. They had big, beautiful temples in Jerusalem, in Greece, right? They had big, beautiful temples in Egypt. They had beautiful temples everywhere. But the biggest temple, the most beautiful temple in the world, according to the Romans, was Herod's temple. So if you're a pagan who lives 2,000 years ago, and wherever you live, in Turkey, Greece, Egypt, wherever, and you want to go to, and I want to make an offering in the biggest temple in the world, in the best temple in the world, according to the Romans, why would I not send my money to Jerusalem just to cover my bases? Look, I'm going to bet on the biggest temple. God must be pretty powerful. He's got the best temple. There were people who said that. You can say what you want. Look, people like winners. That God must be a winner because he's got a big temple. Think about how many times people make a decision of where to go based on how much money the person has or how nice the place looks. Look how many people used to buy Patriots jerseys. They're not Patriot fans. They like winners. So there were people who bought into it. Now, the fact that they destroyed the temple, the Romans, that put an end to a lot of pagans betting on the Jews. But there were a lot of Jews a lot of priests were being supported by them. Look, there's a lot of Christians that support Israel today. A lot. We see it every day. There's a major argument that went on today about whether Christians love Israel more than Jews do, right? So the question is where does that come from? Here's the thing I want you to all realize and all think about. We've been here before. It was 2,000 years ago, but we were here before. There were Romans who didn't want the temple to be destroyed. There were Christians who probably didn't want they were only 30 years old at that point. They didn't want the temple to be destroyed. There were lots of people who didn't want the temple to be destroyed. You know who destroyed the temple? We did. Jews burned down the temple. People don't talk about it, but rival Jewish factions burned down the temple. We know it. Josephus said it. The Romans said it. We set the fire. We set the fire to burn it down. He said it. We set the fire to burn down the temple. What were we doing? I mean,
Didn't he say, it's been a long time, but didn't he say he burned it down because he didn't want the Romans to come in and do it?
you can say whatever you want about it. We don't know. Some people said that that's what his point was, or some people point out that he said that because there were Jews who said it. He didn't say it. Josephus didn't say it. He didn't dislike. He said some of the Jews felt that would happen, that they would violate the temple. They would violate the temple. Would violate the temple, which is what the Greeks had done during the Maccabean period. But there were a lot of Jews who also said, good riddance to it. It's causing us too much pain. It's causing us too much corruption. So back to the offerings here, folks, because again,
It's more fun.
I know, but it also reminds us that this is relevant because we're living in this period again. And I've told you before, and I'll say it now, even before the end of class, I don't believe that there ever has to be another temple built.
Yeah, you said that, man.
But I will tell you that I firmly believe in my heart, in my mind, that all of Israel is the third temple. And so I treat it as the temple. So Israel to me is a project. The nation of Israel to me is the third temple. And I didn't invent that, but I believe it. There are people who teach that. There are Jews in Israel who believe that. And again, some of them become very
Well, that's a good argument.
very religious, the religious Zionists. But I will tell you that if the entire country is the third temple, then again, the fear is that we bring it down ourselves. And that's what we have to be careful of. So just as we burn down the second temple or the temple of Herod, we can destroy this temple.
2,000 years to get.
Well, hopefully we've learned from our mistakes. But the fact that people now view Israel as a temple, I will say that based on the language that we see from Christians today, better Christians who believe it, And I think it's going to become more and more articulated that way. Okay. So, so back to Aaron and his sons. These things shall be eaten only by those for whom expiation was made with them, and they were ordained and consecrated. And by the way, I'm not encouraging anybody by those words to say that Israel is without mistakes and Israel is without flaws. What I'm saying is that the project, the undertaking of the construction of Israel is a third temple to me. I want to make that clear. I don't want to make it seem like I said that, therefore Netanyahu or any prime minister of Israel is a high priest. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that the project is such that it is an undertaking that to me is a divine project in the sense that it is the highest purpose of how. I also didn't say that God made Israel exist, but I do say it's possible, but I didn't say that. But I also will say that the desire to see Israel established by me and by other people is the same way that we would feel about a temple. That I feel comfortable saying. Beyond that is speculation, but that is to me is where I stand on it, which is why one of the reasons why when people say, why are you so passionate about it, is because to me it is the temple. That is the temple. Every step in Israel is you're stepping in the holy place. So if any of the flesh of ordination or any of the bread is left over until morning, you shall put what is left to the fire. It shall not be eaten, for it is holy. So you can't just throw it away. You can't eat it afterwards. It can't go bad. You have to destroy it. You have to burn it up because it is dedicated. Thus shall you do to Aaron and his sons, just as I have commanded you, ordain them through 7 days. And so that's the first 7 days of the priesthood, okay, which we'll see in Leviticus. But here it says, and each day you shall prepare a bull as a sin offering for expiation. You shall purge the altar by performing purification on it, and you shall anoint it and consecrate it. 7 days you shall perform purification for the altar to consecrate it, and the altar shall become most holy. Whatever touches the altar shall become consecrated. And then it says, now this is what you shall do upon the altar: 2 yearling lambs each day regularly. And this is what we call the Tamid offering. This is done every single day. You shall offer 1 lamb in the morning, and you shall offer the other at twilight. Okay? So those are the Tamid offerings, the one that's in the morning and the one that's in the evening. There shall be 1/10 of a measure of choice flour with 1/4 of hin of beaten oil mixed in, and a libation of 1/4 of hin of wine and of 1 lamb. And if you notice, by the way, too, here when it talks about the lambs being offered, it says 1 in the morning and 1 at night. You'd think if the day started at night, they would offer the first one at night and then the next one in the morning. So clearly something's a little different here when it comes to the priesthood, which is that the priesthood really runs on a day clock. It doesn't run on a night clock. It doesn't run on.
Were we running at night clock back there then?
Well, from this standpoint, I want to make it clear. The priesthood, the offerings are not given it in the dark. So you would say, well, when the sun goes down, that's when the first, but it's not really like that because this is only done during the day. It's not done at night.
It says twilight night.
Yeah. And so you don't do it at the nighttime. And you say, well, twilight sounds like it's midnight. It's not midnight. It's not midnight. It's when the sun goes down.
Right.
It's the Arab. Is twilight midnight?
No, twilight is when the
Sun goes down. Do some people call twilight midnight?
No,
Okay, good. Because it's not nighttime. It's when the day, it's when the light goes away, right? So it's done while the sun is out. So it's not a nighttime thing. It's not done in the dark. Now, again, you could say, well, there's candles, there's lamps, there's light, but obviously you can't really see what's happening unless the sun is out. And it's not like the day in Jewish tradition and that starts at the nighttime when the sun goes down.
This is not done on the Sabbath, on Shabbat.
Why are you assuming that?
Well, I'm asking against that.
Wait, we'll get to it. No. It says every day, right?
We know it says that.
Right? Well, we're not going to get to it today, so I'll tell you right now. Not only is that not the case, right? We offered it on Shabbat, but we offer an extra sacrifice on Shabbat,
Right, I'm sorry, right.
which is called the Musaf offering,
Right.
which is
Now we
an
have the
actual
prayer.
Musaf prayer that we add to our Shabbat offering service to take place of that offering. So yeah, you think that to some extent that they didn't do it on Shabbat, but on the other hand, because it's a holiday and we read about it on holidays and we read about it every day, you have this holiday offering that comes on Shabbat, which is in addition to the offering of the day. So these are done twice a day, every day. It has nothing to do with sin offering. It has nothing to do with asking for well-being or for health or for sin. It does say they're little, but they're lambs. They're lambs. It doesn't say they're little. They're little. They're little. But there is actually a different word for lamb than it is for the ram that we read about before. So it is a different word, because I think back here, just to look real quick, it says here it's ayil. This is the word that's translated as ram. Also, ayil could also be, by the way, a male goat. By the way, it doesn't have to be doesn't have to be a lamb. I'm not sure if a keves, by the way, I have to look it up. I think a keves might be able to be, maybe not. Maybe it has to be a lamb. Okay. There shall be a 10th measure of choice flour with quarter of a hin of beaten oil mixed in, and a libation of a quarter hin of wine for one lamb. And you shall offer the other lamb at twilight, repeating with it the meal offering of the morning, with its libation and offering by fire for a pleasing odor to Adonai. So it says that God likes the smell. A regular burnt offering throughout the generations, at the entrance of the tent of meeting before Adonai, for I will meet with you, and there I will speak with you. So this is the entrance to the tent of meeting, right? So this is the altar that's by the tent of meeting. There is an altar inside the tabernacle, inside the place that we saw, but this is for the regular offering for the tent, by the tent of meeting. Now, this says throughout the generations, right? So this is not done one time. This is not done for a couple of years. This is for all generations. Yeah, which God says is a good smell. So it's a pleasing odor. And it says, continues, actually the sentence continues, or at least the idea continues, and there I will meet with the Israelites, and it shall be sanctified by my presence. So this is part of, again, how God meets us in this holy space, right? I will sanctify the tent of meeting and the altar, and I will consecrate Aaron and his sons to serve me as priests. I will abide among the Israelites, and I will be their God. And this is the same kind of understanding we had at the very beginning of Truma, where it says, I will build a sanctuary for me to dwell amongst them, which is v'shachanti betoch b'nei Israel. So it's almost a complete, maybe it actually says this here. This is almost a, no, it doesn't actually, I don't think it says it. No, it doesn't say it, but it is the same root and the same idea that we read at the very beginning. So I will dwell amongst them. I will be their God, and they shall know that I am Adonai. I am Adonai, their God, who brought them out of the land of Egypt, that I might abide among them. Again, I, their God, Adonai. So we're going to read about one other section before we get to the end tonight, which is some of the other things that were part of this tabernacle, which is the beautiful smell and the altar of incense. You shall make an altar for burning incense. Make it of acacia wood. It shall be a cubit long and a cubit wide. It shall be square and 2 cubits high. Its horns of one piece with it. Overlay it with pure gold, its tops, its sides around about, and its horns. And make a gold molding for it around about. And make 2 rings for it under its molding, and make them on its 2 side walls on opposite sides. We're going to read about one other thing too. They shall serve as holders for poles, which they carry it. Make the poles of acacia wood and overlay them with gold. Place it in front of the curtain that is over the ark of the pact. In front of the cover that is over the pact, there will I meet you, where I will meet you. So again, this is the altar, the incense altar that is inside the tabernacle. So this is inside by where the Holy of Holies is. So this is not outside. This is an incense altar that is inside where the Holy of Holies is. Okay, so this is not where most people go.
Most people, no one goes except for Aaron.
On it, Aaron shall burn aromatic incense. He shall burn it, well, in this part, in front of the holy, it's in front of the holy holies. So other people could see it, but it says on it, Aaron shall burn aromatic incense. So the assumption is, again, only the high priest will actually burn it, but other people could see it and other people could smell it. He shall burn it every morning when he tends to the lamps, right? And Aaron shall burn it at twilight when he lights the lamps, a regular incense offering before Adonai. Let me just make sure again, that's what it says. Yeah, it says, Ben Har Haravim, right at the twilight. You shall not offer alien incense upon it, or a burning offering, or a meal offering, neither shall you pour a libation on it. Once a year, Aaron shall perform purification upon its horns with blood of the sin offering of purification. Purification shall be performed on it once a year throughout the ages. It is most holy to Adonai. So I said, this is not where we're going to end. This is where the Torah portion, Truma, Tetzaveh, or just Tetzaveh ends when we read it separately. It ends right here. This is not where, again, Christian scholars broke it, because Ki Tisa is the new portion, but it's not the end of a chapter. We're only in verse 11, and we're going to read on. We're going to kind of follow the fact that maybe this isn't the best place to break, but whatever. There is a reason to break it here, which is why we broke it. Because right here it says, and again, it's a break in an idea. Well, you'll see. Adonai spoke to Moses saying, when you take a census of Israelite men according to their army enrollment, you shall pay Adonai a ransom for himself on being enrolled, that no plague may come upon them through being enrolled. So this is what the words Ki Tisa means. This is about, again, raising up people. That's what the word to raise up or to take a census, Ki Tisat HaRosh, to raise up their heads, which is a way of saying we're going to count them. And when we count them, we're doing it and we're paying something when we do it. We're paying a ransom because we're not supposed to actually take census of people. And if you do, this is what everyone who's entered into the record shall pay. A half shekel by the sanctuary weight, 20 gerahs to the shekel. A half shekel is an offering to Adonai, which means that whenever they did a census, which is whenever the king wanted to do a census, he also had to pay. Everyone had to pay. Now, of course, this doesn't become just for the census. This becomes a yearly tax on every Jew. So when we talk about 8 million Jews in the world, maybe at the time of the Romans, right before it was destroyed, that if 8 million Jews, there's a half shekel on each, that's 4 million shekels that comes in. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of money. That's 4 million shekel. Remember, shekel's originally a weight. That's like 4 million. It's not pounds, but it's here, Mike, can you tell me what a shekel weight is real quick? What does it say? A shekel weighs in ounces. But if you put out 4 million of those, that's a lot of money. You can't come up with all that money. Yeah.
You can't possibly tell me. So the people the person that wrote this, the author of this, remember this. 20 years, generation, 2 generations, whenever they decided to write this portion down, tell me God wanted, what is God? What is it? What is Rob? I need something more. Sorry.
Okay,
Sorry.
so no. So here you go.
One shekel is 0.4.
0.4 ounces. So 4 million times 0.4 ounces is 1.6 million. Yeah, well, it's 1.6 million ounces. You said it's 0.4 ounces. Okay, so 4 million shekels would be 1.6 million ounces, which would be how many pounds? It's pretty easy, right? How many ounces are there to a pound?
60.
So it's divided, it's 100,000 pounds. It's a lot of silver. 100,000 pounds of silver would have been collected. Now, of course, not everybody gave it when there were 8 million Jews, but even if 10% of the people would give it, I mean, that's hundreds of thousands of tens of thousands of pounds of silver that were coming in. Now, if you're going to say, well, maybe not everybody did it, but every pilgrim who came in to Jerusalem would give it.
This had to have been a rationalization by the author that God wanted, when in fact it was the leaders at the time who demanded. It has.
Well, let's look at what Rashi says. So he's writing 1,000 years later. God showed Moses a kind of fiery coin, the weight of which was a half shekel, and said to him, like this you shall give. So he actually, one of Rashi's things is he actually had to show him what a shekel looked like. With the assumption that, again, you didn't ask the question, but Rashi asked the question, because there's always, we actually start with what's Rashi's question, right? So what's Rashi writing about? So his first thing that Rashi writes about is, how did Moses know what a coin looked like? Because they're in the desert and they're Egyptian period, right? They're not in Roman or Greco-Roman period. They're not even in the period when people had coins. So how does he know? God showed it to him. So God's basically saying, when the time comes where you need a coin, this is what the coin looks like. So that was Rashi's question. So you didn't even expect Rashi to have that question, but Rashi's one of his questions is, where does the money, how does he even know what money looks like? So let's see what else he says.
What does God mean?
Well, it's for the priests, right? It's for the temple. It's for the tabernacle here, but later on, let's assume it was written like we assume it was written once the temple was built. Because we assume, by the way, John, that this was not for the tabernacle, that this was for the temple, that the priests knew by this period of time, you bring your coin. So, this doesn't really help us a lot.
God knows about monetary theory and.
No, well, so
there has to be other.
So here's another thing. Half the shekel, after the shekel of holy, the weight. Well, that doesn't help a lot. Shekels is 20. No. So here's the question, right? These are all basically Rashi's questions of how much was this?
Who wrote this? It wasn't God that wrote it.
That's my point. The author wrote this.
Right.
To explain why people had to bring in the money, which is a tax, a tax that people had to bring to the temple. This was a temple tax.
But God's not going to want a tax.
Well, look, but if you're saying, but and the priests are the ones who are saying this, but you're saying, okay, so what's the tax? How do you figure that out? So people would say, well, look, we know we have to pay a tax to the government because they had to pay taxes even back then, right? During the time of King David, they were paying taxes. King Solomon, they're paying taxes. Then they're basically saying that there's a component of their taxes that go to religion. Now, just so you know, and just for us to be completely transparent and honest about this, you live in one of the few countries that doesn't have that. By that, I mean that if you lived in England, let's say, at the same time that the colonists were trying to make the country, you had to pay a tax to your local church. The Catholic Church, what upset people in England in particular, was that they didn't want the money to go to Rome. They wanted the money to stay in their country. So they started their own Church of England. Now, you think that's because King Henry wanted to get divorced. Well, that's part of it, but a lot of it had to do with the fact that they didn't want to send money to Rome anymore. Now, if we're really honest about it, this is the problem that everybody has with their taxes, which is, do they want it to stay in their own community? Right? So we still have that argument.
Now, you're saying that they had a Church of England up. Now, there was just a handful of Jews. They also had to pay.
Usually, wait a second. Usually the Jews had to pay a higher tax than the local people who were already worshiping in that place. Part of it was punishment, right? Part of it was punishment because you weren't Jew. You were not
actually funded almost America.
Okay, but I'm talking about you were talking about religious taxes.
Right.
In all fairness, there was also a special tax that Jews in Arab countries had to pay to their Muslim overlords. It was called jizya, and it was a very famous thing that Jews, even in Ottoman Turkey, 200 years ago, 150 years ago, had to pay that tax.
Really?
Oh yeah. So part of it was punishment for not being part of the religion and to encourage people to convert. So if you converted, you didn't have to pay that tax. But there was also another issue, which is that if you were that religion, you would make your offering when you came to church too. So it wasn't like you just paid the tax of the church. To some extent, Jews were paying because they weren't paying in the offering to when they went to a church. I'm not saying that made up for it, because the purpose of it was really to punish them for not being Christian, and also maybe to encourage them to convert. But it didn't work. I mean, in most cases, people didn't convert for the fact that they didn't want to pay a tax. Same thing with jizya. And jizya tax, by the way, was incumbent on Christians who lived in Muslim countries too. It wasn't just on Jews. I want to make that clear, because some people say Jews, there was a Jew tax. It wasn't a Jew tax in the Muslim world. It was a tax on anyone who was not Muslim.
My McDonald's husband was born in Iran.
Uh-huh.
So their family was being taxed in Iran too then?
Yes. Look, part of what happens still in Europe is that the government actually collects taxes. I just want to tell you that if you go to England, it's not so much a part of English tax, but in Germany, for example, part of your taxes can be designated for the religious institutions. It's up to you to decide now whether you want to opt for that. But if you do, you opt for it, and then you tell them which religion you are, and then it gets sent to that community. So in Germany, for example, if you say you're Jewish, you can say, I want part of my taxes to go to the synagogue, to the Jewish community. And the Jewish community gets money from the government based on how many are enrolled on the government right now at this moment, today. So one of the things that rabbis and synagogues have to do in Germany is they have to encourage their congregants to put down that they want their taxes to be designated to the Jewish community. And then based on how many people in that town are saying that they're going to that synagogue, then the money will get a portion that way. Yeah, well, this is the argument of the separation of church and state. You know, this is why we didn't want to have that kind of system. So
That's one of the reasons they came. That's right. That's why.
So one of the things that some of the early colonists argued over was whether there should be any support for religious institutions, and the consensus was there shouldn't be. But you know, there was arguments over it, and there were people who said that there should be some support, but most of the people said no, the country, we don't want to go back to that way, and they didn't do it. But as of right now, that still happens today. And in England, the synagogues don't get supported by the government per se. There's a little bit of money that they can apply for, but the main thing that they get in England is that, and it didn't happen for my wife because she didn't go to one of these schools, but the Jewish schools in England are supported by the government. The trade-off is that the schools have to also take non-Jewish students. So if they want to take the government money, they have to do that. Not all of them do it.
You know, something similar, very kind of similar is happening in some cities. For example, where my daughter lives in Kalamazoo, Michigan, she's been there X number of years. Her son now will be able to go to a four-year college in that city free.
I don't know.
And I'm sure it's from taxes.
I don't know what to tell you, but I don't know what to tell you about that, but I will tell you that it's not free. It's not free.
But
You know.
back to this, the explanation has to be that this is God's first dealing with humans. Otherwise, he would have known that we were corruptible. Right? The payments, the taxes, the sacrificing. It has to be that God had never dealt with this species before, dealt with animals.
That's if you assume that this was written by God. If it's written by the priests, they just had a justification for doing the tax that you're supposed to still give to them, which is probably where it came from.
History is written by a victim.
Yeah, and these people wanted this money. So we not get quite far enough. We didn't get to no, it's okay. We didn't get to the laver, but we'll start off. We got to Ki Tisa. So this next week, what we're going to read about is we're going to start off next week with the laver, with the last piece of the tabernacle that we read about, which is the washing stand. And then we're going to get to, we're going to get right about here into Shabbat, which is where we learn that you're not supposed to work on Shabbat, but we'll get to this next week. And then, my friends, we will get to this very, very special thing, which is right here, right at the beginning of chapter 32, which is Moses took too long to come down. And they said, come, let us make a god. And this is the golden calf. So next week, we get away from the temple construction. So we have a little bit more of the tabernacle construction. Specifically, as we said, the water laver, and we'll get into the incense. We didn't get quite into the incense, which we'll read next week. You can read about the incense, but then we're going to get into the golden calf. So the question that really becomes, again, part of the thing to be conscious of is if they don't get the instructions, they don't get these detailed instructions about what they're supposed to build, they're going to build a golden calf. You're going to build the wrong thing. So you either get to build something right or you're going to build something wrong, but there's no really in between. Because I guess the question is, what do we do as human beings? Are we going to do good construction, or are we going to do bad construction? And so we got to have rules for how to build the right stuff, which is what we've gotten. Now we're going to get the problem, which is the golden calf. Everybody, we look forward to seeing you next week, same time, right here on our Temple Beth Ami station. Take care.
Thank you.
Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody. Thanks for being here. Bye-bye.
Cheryl, by David.